Welcome to the Evolving Warfighter. My name is Dr. Franklin Annis, and today we're going to be talking about the concept of a third generation in camouflage. I'm joined today by a distinguished guest by the name of Rick Cole. He's a strategic communication consultant specializing in the prevention and countering of violent extremism. He has 23 years of military experience, including a decade in public affairs and information operations. He has operational tours in Northern Ireland, Iraq, Afghanistan, and Somalia, as well as training missions in the Balkans, Caribbean, and Ukraine. Richard Cole is the military director of i3Gen, a specialized consultant company that brings together business marketing with military strategic communications and information operations. This combination generates added insight and value to both civilian and military clients. i3Gen helps key leaders and organizations improve their engagement and communications. So I appreciate you taking the time with me today to discuss this topic, and I definitely appreciate you reaching out over Twitter to share this interesting concept that you have.
No problem at all.
So we'll jump on in. So the first question I have is, before we talk about the third generation of camouflage, we kind of have to step back a little. So could you explain the first and second generation of camouflage, and then where does this idea of a third generation come from?
Yeah, so the idea that I came up with through lots of reading and thought over a number of times, and this is kind of the first time I've put some of these ideas down in the form of a blog. So the concept is based in that the first generation camouflage is what we all think of as camouflage. It's greys and greens and browns. So reading into it, the origin of camouflage came about at about the same time as the rifle. So all of a sudden our adversaries could reach out much further, and the way we could avoid being shot is don't be seen. So the old red tunics of the British Army were consigned to ceremonial duties, and instead rifle green was adopted, and in the hotter areas of the empire, we went for khaki browns, dusty browns. And that was everything from dyeing the old white belts with tea bags to dull the colours. And essentially, first generation camouflage is those camouflages which are designed to defeat the human eye. So it's all about breaking up the shape of the object, the colours, the shine, whatever it might be. And that's what we all kind of understand as camouflage. As that then developed, particularly during the Second World War, it became about defeating the technology that people were using against us. So with the evolution of radar, we then countered that by camouflaging our aircraft using stealth technology. When they started intercepting our communications, we started using codes, and then we started using burst transmission and reducing our electronic and our other signatures to reduce our vulnerability through that. And that's how I describe second generation camouflage, is to defeat the technology. But also at that same time, particularly during the Second World War, we started using camouflage not only being used to hide, but also to deceive. And we had large-scale deception operations, such as Operation Mincemeat, such as a lot of the things surrounding the D-Day landings, which were all about making the adversary make bad decisions, whether that be moving troops to other parts of the battlefield that were not to his advantage, or whether it be to plant false plans, or whatever it might be, including the use of propaganda into the occupied countries to make his job more difficult and get inside his decision-making cycle. So that idea that it wasn't just about hiding, but you could also use to deceive it, came about during that period of the development of second generation camouflage. And then I was reading the book about Churchill's Wizards by Nicholas Rankin, and I realized that a lot of the problems that we face today cannot be met using first and second generation camouflage. And actually what we need is a third generation of camouflage, not to replace the previous two, but to enhance them and to give us new capabilities which we can use to get around some of the problems that we face, particularly in the information environment around fake news, propaganda, active measures, conspiracy theories, which all start to undermine some of our strategies. And that's where I started to formulate the idea behind third generation camouflage.
So just to summarize, there's kind of two theories to camouflage. So number one, I can take whatever I'm trying to hide and make it look like something else, so it disappears into the background. Or that second theory is to duplicate falsely that item enough that you can't tell what is the real tank versus what is the inflatable tank.
Absolutely, absolutely. And if you look at, particularly during the Cold War, a lot of our emerging technologies, such as stealth, they were the secret that you had to protect with a bodyguard of lies, to use the old phrase. So there was lots of measures put in place to make sure that those aircraft were never photographed, to make sure those aircraft were tested in an area where they were unlikely to be seen. And yet there were still conspiracy theories at that time around Area 51 and the skunk works and stuff like that. So those things don't go away, but there are occasions where some of those stories and some of those myths and legends can work in your favor.
In your article, Rethinking Camouflage, you talked about the belief that Britain and their ally may have lost the operational edge when it comes to using third generation camouflage or the control of information operations and for counter warfare, etc. Do you believe that there's a country out there or entities out there that do have a cutting edge?
I think most people at this time, given what's in the news recently and given the stories about Russian interference and their manipulation of the information environment to create division, whether it be the US elections, whether it be Brexit, whether it be other issues, particularly around Syria, a lot of people will say possibly Russia. Now, yes, I would agree that they've taken a lot of this Cold War thinking, particularly around maskirovka, which is their kind of concept around camouflage and how it's used, and they've brought it into the modern age. And to a degree, I would agree with that. As part of their hybrid warfare strategy, that is what they're doing. It's advantage by all means. But what I think we overestimate, is the fact that they haven't taken a third generation camouflage approach to their thinking. And that can be seen with the Salisbury attack, in that both the operatives were seen arriving in the UK and they were photographed. That open source intelligence was used to expose their real identities and their real military histories and their careers, and that they had been given awards and all that kind of stuff. And that was predominantly through the Bellingcat open source investigation website. So while I think a lot of people will believe that Russia has these capabilities, which I think it does, I think what's lacking is its approach has not adopted what I would consider a third generation approach.
So they're skirting the edge and sometimes engage in this activity, but maybe not using it or optimizing the approach. Is that?
Yeah, and I think one of the things from my time in information operations is about the coordination of your activities, and those activities include things like OPSEC. Now, you can bring in experts to help you design a deception operation, and they will tell you all about sleight of hand, and they will tell you all about distraction and how to get your target audience to be looking elsewhere while you're doing something. But if your operational security is so bad, then you won't be able to do a deception operation, because people will know the truth before you've had time to execute your deception plan. So the activities have to be coordinated, and whether that's your electronic warfare with your presence posture profile or whatever it might be, these activities have to be coordinated. And I think that's where the third generation approach will fall down, is if these activities, which are usually held in different parts of defense, aren't coordinated. So I think it's an approach and a mindset rather than an actual capability.
Makes sense. How do you envision the application of third generation camouflage? Would this require something like the Ghost Army units that were created during World War II?
I think that's the thinking that we need to try and achieve. I think we need to try and think of it in very large scale. However, those ghost army units were created during the Second World War, which was particularly for Britain, was a war of national survival. We also didn't have at that time the cluttered, congested, and all-invasive information environment that we have now. So trying to recreate an army on the British south coast of inflatable tanks and dummy airfields would be almost impossible, simply because people would photograph it. It would be on social media. People would, the information environment is too wild and loose to allow us to do that level of deception. However, I think that the thinking is correct there, in that you need to look at some of the ways that the information environment can be exploited, how it can be used to your advantage, without crossing any legal or ethical lines, to show that actually we do have these capabilities, and these capabilities can be brought to bear in a coordinated manner to give us a strategic or operational advantage. However, that will require a lot of changes in our doctrine, changes in our approach, and I think for the vast majority of military planners and military thinkers, and particularly in senior leadership, that might be a step too far. So what I think we need to do is we need to start introducing new concepts through our doctrine, through our training, through our professional military education, that allows people to be more imaginative and be more creative. So at a time, either strategically or operationally, where there is a requirement for these kind of activities, that we already have that mental agility to be able to do these things, rather than having formed units whose responsibility it is to do this stuff. The example I always use is when I'm teaching is OPSEC is everyone's responsibility. We all know that, but nobody takes responsibility for it, and therefore it kind of slips under the radar. Whereas during the Second World War, you had this whole thing of loose lips sink ships, and the wolves have ears, and keep mum, she's not dumb, and all the posters. And the Purple Dragon program in the United States tries to bring that OPSEC thinking to the fore, but because it is thinking, people then kind of can put it off to the side, because it should be ingrained in our day-to-day activity rather than just an add-on. And I think that's where this may almost certainly fall down, is because it does take those leaps of cognitive faith.
That makes sense. I guess one recent event in the not too distant past, in terms of information control, was soldiers have a requirement to maintain physical fitness. So soldiers run all the time. There's been some great technology that's come out to help track whatever it's calories burned or distance you run. So a lot of the Fitbit type devices have been worn by soldiers, and then they may have been fed into programs like MyFitnessPal or Nike Run, where all of a sudden, if you kind of search the earth, you all of a sudden can find very precisely mapped out exact structure of the roads on military bases. And one of the concepts that I always had thought of is, well, we've kind of betrayed our position by using this type of technology, maybe not being aware of how it could be broadcast or how it could be accessed. But the other side of that coin is, if you could develop a system to make a whole bunch of this false data, it would be very easy to manufacture, several hundred of these fake military bases where you couldn't determine who was where, whether it was truthful or not. So just that type of the concept of soldiers tend to, like you said, sometimes not take operational security serious, and could that, in theory, be used towards our advantage if we could design a system like that?
Yeah, absolutely, and I think that's where certainly when we were considering some of the recent operational scenarios, you've essentially got three choices. You've got information whiteout, where there is just so much information out there that you can't possibly work out which bit of information is the correct bit, because there's just so much of it. You've got information blackout, where you just remove all information, and therefore you're peering into a black hole. However, in that scenario, whatever does pop up is immediately obvious. Or you've got the concept of brownout. So it's not blackout, it's not whiteout, but there is just so much corrupted information. There's so much mess. There's so much ambiguity that trying to find those real bits of data that you can use to then target or then to build an intelligence picture is there. With the Fitbits and the Strada app and stuff like that, I think at the tactical level, the guys in the village down the road know that there's a base there. They know that there's soldiers there. They know that there's vehicles, and some of that stuff comes out all the time. Most American bases will fly an American flag. American vehicles are American vehicles. The recent pictures of an individual getting involved with the Nairobi attack, was identified initially as a Brit because of the weapon he was carrying, not because, as was initially reported, that he was a Navy SEAL because he had a patch on his equipment that made people assume. So yeah, there are ways of looking at that information and how it can be manipulated to our advantage. But I think with regards to the operational security, I think when soldiers will take it seriously is when it becomes personal security. When it's them and their families, then it becomes more important to them. And that's something that I mentioned in the original piece, is that Brits especially, we're very open and honest about almost everything, but when it comes to the really important things, we're actually quite shy about it. So what we need to do is we need to make that link between operational security being a threat to something being a threat to the operation, and personal security, because as soon as you involve the individual and their family and their friends and family, it then becomes a real issue to them, and then they start taking responsibility. And I think the Fitbit stuff is a really good example of, do you need a device on your body to tell you how far you've run? As a soldier, no, you should be doing your PT all the time. And actually, do you need to post it on your social media that you went for a run? No, because you should be running every day. And it's that kind of thing that I think that as an organization and as a unit, you should say, well, do you need to wear these things? Do you need to be carrying a device? Do you need a phone? Do you need an iPad? Or will we provide you with the equipment that you need to keep in touch with your friends and family via a secure means?
That makes a lot of sense. If you were given kind of infinite resources to go out and test this theory right now, so the question is, who would you bring together to work on it? And then is there any certain specialties or fields that you would see are more important in this role?
I had a giggle with this question because I could list a number of individuals who I'd love to work with, but we might not necessarily achieve the aim. A lot of my kind of social media friends and family would definitely fall into that kind of, I would love to work with them. However, how much we would actually achieve, I would probably question. I chaired a conference in London last November, looking at social media in defense. And one of the speakers said that if he had just one day of the Afghan budget for the operations in Afghanistan, he could change the world. And that really stuck with me. So in answer to your question, I think the one thing I'd be looking for the background of these individuals and these thinkers would be, I would be looking for an extreme diversity. I go back to the kind of World War II scenario, and I look at the camoufleurs, the French initially employed, and then the Royal Engineers, who would create false trees to put into no man's land as observation posts. But then going forward into the Second World War, you saw Pinewood Studios and the British movie community coming forward and disguising trucks as tanks and tanks as trucks so that they could move across the northern desert without being. So I think I would look at possibly special effects artists. I would be looking to those kind of creative industries that their job is to make things look different. So I'd be looking at special effects, whether that be kind of computer generated CGI or whether that be the more artistic stuff, with from zombie films and stuff like that. I would look for storytellers. I would look for people whose job it is to tell stories. I think one of the elements we're particularly missing at the moment is the use of comedy. If you go back through some of the catalogues of the propaganda we used against the Third Reich during the Second World War, a lot of that was based on comedy, on innuendo, and we've lost that because of the political correctness of the times we live in. We've lost that ability to kind of take the mickey out of people. I would definitely look towards the boffins. I would look at the cyber community, the electronic warfare community. It's not my area of specialty, so I would need people like that to come in and guide me. I would look for contrarian thinkers. I would look for historians. I would look for people with a lot of knowledge in certain specific areas. And I would want military planners. I'm slightly biased because, as a military planner, that's what I do. I would want military planners with a strong information operations background, because they understand the requirement to coordinate. They understand the need to understand our audiences and to develop channels and clear messaging. But a recent article in the Wavell Room, which is an online resource here in the UK, also looked at leadership from the point of view of learning from terrorist organizations. And actually, if you want to understand how they think, you're going to have to bring some of them in. So I would probably be looking at people who have been through a disarmament reintegration program to better understand their motivations for joining a terrorist organization or for taking a particular standpoint, whether that be ideologically or politically, understanding what motivated them to do those things so that we can then better understand our audience. So it would be a real random mix of people. And unfortunately, I don't think we have that in the military. I think one of the problems that we do have in the military is that we look around our headquarters and we think, well, what a diverse headquarters we've got. We've got people of all different skin colors. We've got people of all different religions. We've got all sorts of different people from different backgrounds, but they're all in the military. They're all united by that one thing, that they either in the military or they work for the military. So there is always going to be that level of groupthink, when actually what you need to do is you need to bring in individuals who don't think like you and don't see the world the way that you see it in order to develop a capability such as this. But I think it is so diverse and such a huge problem that you would need to have a different team for each problem.
I definitely agree with you, and especially with the concept of diversity. A lot of times when we use the term diverse, it's really the appearance. But if I take an extremely diverse-looking group and I send them through the exact same military training, they're more or less going to come out with the same, what the Army would call a toolkit. So they're going to access the same type of thought process compared to that true diversity of thinking, and that might cause us to reframe kind of how we approach this kind of intellectual diversity.
And military planning is military planning. Whether you use MDMP, the 6 steps, the 7 questions, whatever it is, you're railroading down people a certain train of thought. And yes, we can say, we need to look at it from the point of view of the enemy. Yeah, you do. But unless you have someone from the enemy sat in your headquarters, then you're not really going to do it, are you?
Well, it's interesting because being on kind of the outside edge of military thought process, no one likes the guy that thinks extremely, we use the slogan outside the box, because in the military, that one person that thinks incredibly differently than the rest typically doesn't survive well in their career. But those might be the people that we turn to first, because we need people to think in ways utterly different than we've traditionally thought.
Absolutely. And we have mechanisms to get around that. We have red teaming and we have red cells on exercises. But if you fill that red team with people who think like you, then they're going to think like you. That's part of the problem. One of the things we're looking at developing is a red teaming capability which doesn't think like you, which doesn't speak the same language as you, doesn't look like you, doesn't sound like you. And I think that's an interesting area, particularly when we start looking at information operations and information warfare.
So one of the most interesting aspects of your paper I found is kind of the use of military mythology. Whether it's British tabloids or American tabloids, or whether it's Facebook, you get these stories that come out about well, I think you used the example of a military working dog tearing the throat out of a terrorist, or maybe a sniper that ends up blowing up like a whole squad of people because that precisely placed bullet that probably isn't true and non-factual, but it's beneficial for the military to know when not to outright deny these and kind of create the mystique of, if we say we're not going to deny and confirm, there's this thought, well, if they're not going to definitively come out and say it's false, then maybe it's true. They just can't say it's true. And it's especially interesting where kind of in the social media area, how you might use kind of the major players, whether it's within the veteran community or guys like us or PME type individuals, to kind of spread or kind of reinforce that maybe these are truthful, and that might have a very significant impact on whether or not people decide to go to the foreign lands and take up the fight against us or not.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, there is a mystique around the military, particularly certain elements of it. And I think that the stories that are out there is always a grain of truth in there. There is always a grain of truth in all mythology and all forms of storytelling. And that's why they resonate with audiences. I think what we should be more alive to is the potential that we can take some of this mythology. They've just run a series of programs here in the UK about Parachute Regiment, and it follows a number of individuals through basic training, through P Company, and into their battalion. And the final episode sees an element of that battalion jumping into Eastern Europe, just miles from the Russian border. So there is a kind of presence, posture, profile element to that story, to that series of programs, which is, at the end of the day, it's a recruiting tool. You know, we want people to join the military because they want to be a paratrooper. Absolutely not got a problem with that. In the same way that, you know, the particularly in the US Special Forces community, on the Navy SEAL side, there's always ongoing jokes about Navy SEALs. You know, it's all about the book. It's always about the movie. It's all about, you know, where their career is going to go when they leave the SEALs. Are they going to go into politics? Are they going to write films? Are they going to have books out? Whatever it might be. But all of those things help manifest that mystique, those mysteries, the folklore that surrounds those particular units. And one of the things that I have looked at previously is particularly around the time of the Osama bin Laden raid. The media was full of stories of stealth helicopters. So that if ever you had a power cut in some far off city, there is the opportunity there to say, well, you know, why has the power gone off? You know, where are these ninjas? You know, where are these stealth helicopters? What does a stealth helicopter sound like? How can we reproduce that sound and play it through a sound system or play it across some other form of way of broadcasting it, so that people start thinking, well, what's that strange noise in the night? Why are the dogs barking? You know, why is that car out? And it feeds into these ideas around conspiracy theories, you know, black helicopters, cars parked outside houses, people being followed by men in black suits, and all that kind of stuff. They're very, very powerful things. So I think if these stories come up, there is an opportunity there to deter. And I think that's the effect we're trying to achieve. We're trying to deter people from joining jihad. We're trying to deter people from doing things that we don't want them to do. And part of that is by giving them a glimpse of what might be the truth. You know, the military employs snipers. We know that. It's a fact. The military employs working dogs. Stories about dogs and stories about snipers and stories about special operations forces will always have something of the truth in there. But then where does that truth stop, and where does it then fade into mythology and folklore? And you know, anyone who's sat down and had a beer with military people know that we love telling stories. We know that we love to possibly just slightly exaggerate some of the facts and the circumstances of those stories. It's what we do. It's part of our culture. And so the ability to then take those and use that as an opportunity to have an effect against a possible target audience, I think we shouldn't overlook. And if that means that members of the veterans community or people who are quite vocal on social media, just take a split second to retweet or like it or repost it, you then have an opportunity there to kind of take that mystery and that folklore and take it another step further. And I think, without sounding like a call to arms, I think we all have a slight responsibility in that. If you see a cool picture of an aircraft, repost it. It's just a cool picture of an aircraft. But somewhere down the line, there might be someone thinking, actually, that's quite a cool looking aircraft, and that might be the one that comes and gets me. Therefore, I'm not going to take that course of action. Unlikely, but possible.
Reminds me of a quote out of a John Wayne movie called The Cowboys, where one of the characters tells this kind of outlandish story about his father, and another character asks him if the story was true, and the character says, well, if it isn't, it should be. Where, well, especially, working with individuals or snipers, like on a modern battlefield, the sniper is terrifying because he can call in indirect fire. He'll call in an A-10 Thunderbolt to do tremendous amount of damage. And if you're scared of a sniper's bullet, that's like the least of his capability. But, just kind of understanding the mythos of that single hidden ghost with a single bullet killing you, that can be a lot more powerful.
And it comes back to that idea of camouflage. The reason that the snipers wear a ghillie suit is so that you cannot see them. To see without being seen is actually quite scary. It plays on all sorts of human fears about I'm being watched, I'm being observed, people have some kind of control over me. So it all feeds into that narrative that, there are people out there doing what the military do, and we can help build that story.
So you use an example in your article surrounding Osama bin Laden about the fact that he had complete, basically, radio silence to his compound. So no phone line, no internet whatsoever. And if, kind of in retrospect, if we understood kind of signals and where we'd expect to see signals, where we don't see signals, it might be an indication that there's an attempt to hide something. The question becomes, at what level do we need to understand the noise that we're making digitally, and then how do you figure out the right amount of noise to camouflage a certain area?
Yeah. And the Osama bin Laden one is a good one. They were looking for a needle in a haystack. And it was a case of, well, look where there are no bits of hay. And another example is during the Second World War here in the UK, we had blackout. So all the cities turned their lights out. Cars weren't allowed to use their headlights. All the street lights were turned out, and everyone had blackout curtains in their houses so that you could use a candle without it being seen outside. Which is fine, but then what you do is you create large spaces of black. There's large areas of nothingness. So it doesn't take very long to say, a good navigator of a Junkers 88 bomber can say, well, I know I'm in roughly the right place because I've been traveling at certain speed so I know I'm over the town, but there's nothing but blackness down there. So I'm assuming it's down there and they've just blacked out. Let's drop the bombs. So the next step to that was to create ghost towns in the marshes or in areas where nobody lived by lighting fires or by having gas lamps that made the pattern of a town. So it had streets, it had roundabouts, it had buildings, it had this and that. There was nothing there. It was just the lights. So anyone flying over it who knew that they were roughly near their target would then see it and say, well, that must be it because I can see the lights. So in thinking about third generation camouflage, we have to then look at how does our digital is just one area, and how does our digital footprint affect our ability to do operations? Now, for most people, that's a very individual thing. Those people who were in the military when Facebook and social media became massive generally tended to avoid it because they had all sorts of OPSEC, PERSEC implications. We've now realized that actually we need those things in order to achieve some of our military goals. We now have a generation of people who've grown up on Facebook, even to the point at which before they were born, the scan picture was posted by their mum. Before they were even born, they had a digital footprint. So you're now going to have a generation of people who are joining the military who have this enormous digital footprint, if they then decide to go into Special Operations Forces, for example, they will then have that digital footprint follow them. And while it can be deleted, and there is all sorts of discussions around the right to be forgotten and all that kind of stuff, that for most people that legacy is going to continue. And although a lot of people are leaving Facebook because of the misuse of data and data breaches, the legacy still remains. Likewise, if you have somebody who's not on social media, that doesn't mean that they don't have a presence, because people will take pictures and post them with that person in it. Facial recognition, AI, all that stuff, you're going to be able to start stitching together this person's online persona. So what we need to start thinking of is, do we need to start developing a level of noise which allows us to not just black out, but do we go down the route of whiteout, where, you know, everyone has thousands and thousands and thousands of online persona and only one of them is the real one, which could be quite complicated and confusing for everybody and kind of undoes the whole point of social media? Or do we go for believable cover stories? You know, do we go for legends? Do we go for, you know, if somebody wants to check my background, they're going to see this, this, and this. I'm happy for them to see this, because that persona then protects my family, my home address, the car I drive, and that. And it goes back to the point I made earlier about personal security being more important than operational security for the individual. So do we need to create that level of noise which will pass a cursory check? And for the majority, it is that cursory check. If someone Googles your name, what do they see? If somebody looks for you on LinkedIn or Facebook or Twitter, what do they see? Does it all add up? If they say that they're a consultant, are they a consultant? Probably are. If they say they have a military background, you know, you only have to look at, you know, Stolen Valor in the US, or, you know, the Walter Mitty Hunting Club in the UK. It's very easy to find out somebody's lying about their military career. Some simple questions like, what unit were you in? When did you deploy? Who did you know? All that kind of stuff. Because we are essentially a very small community, and we kind of, if you don't know somebody, then you know somebody who knows somebody. It's not 6 degrees of separation, it's about 2 or 3. So in terms of third generation camouflage, what do we need to do to create that level of noise that when you do have somebody that wants to drop below the radar, are they able to maintain that level of noise so that the activity that they're doing, whatever it might be, goes unnoticed? You know, I'm a very active social media user. I'm on Twitter daily. I manage a number of accounts. And yet I need to maintain that level of activity. I need to maintain that level of noise. If I then go away somewhere and when I'm working overseas, as long as I've got Wi-Fi, I can still create that noise, so that when I mention to somebody, when I'm, you know, having a face-to-face meeting in London, and I say, yeah, I've been over here somewhere, and they go, oh, I didn't know, because you're still on social media. I'm like, well, yeah, that's kind of the point. If I keep dropping off and then reappearing again, then you're setting a digital pattern which people then can then trace, and then you only then have to cross-reference that with other information to say, well, you know, that then links with this time period, which might link it to such and such. And so it's all part of building that picture. I think that the digital noise thing is something that we will have to come to terms with. I think we are getting to the point now where people are accepting that social media, particularly social media, but also open source intelligence, are both very useful tools. But I think with all tools, you have to be confident and competent in their use. Otherwise, you end up cutting fingers off and all sorts. So I think we need to use those tools carefully, and I think we need to use those tools appropriately for the task.
Quite interesting. So this morning when I woke up, I saw a post on Twitter where someone had shut down their account, and they had to actually reopen it to make a statement to everyone saying, hey, I'm going away. I want you to know that my Twitter account wasn't deleted by Twitter itself for political reasons, that this was a voluntary thing, and that I will turn off this account for X amount of time.
Yeah.
But it really goes to the point where if all of a sudden, you know, all these soldiers disappear off Facebook or Twitter, what does it mean? Like, do we just activate, you know, this type of unit because all of a sudden all these people just disappear off the map, or do we allow them to continue to the post, so that is kind of unaware.
And it's the balance of the risk and the reward. If an entire unit turns off their social media feed and hand in their phones, then we can possibly assume that they're deploying somewhere. But for the majority of circumstances, we know that unit's deploying. You only have to go on the British Army website to know which battalion is in Estonia. The battalion in Estonia are tweeting from Estonia. So it's no surprise, but it comes back to this personal security. If you take your mobile phone over there, it will be targeted. And that then exposes your family, your friends, your extended family back in the UK. They will know where you are. They will know why you don't have your phone with you. Don't worry about it. We will provide you with a way of communicating back with your friends and family. Don't worry about that. But for God's sake, don't take your phone with you. And it's that simple. And as soldiers, we need to understand that needs to be part of our pre-deployment training. It needs to be part. But also society needs to understand, and commentators in general need to understand that, we do this for a reason, and it is to counter a specific threat. And I think one of the issues we have, particularly around conspiracy theories and some of the stuff that's out there at the minute, is people don't understand the threat. So I think as military people and as government, we have a duty to explain what that threat is to our society and to our populations and to the electorate, so that they understand why we are doing certain things. And I think that's probably one of the biggest elements we're missing at the minute.
So working in the field of military medicine, I can say there's kind of a secondary issue or problem that I see pop up. And so when I went to basic training, over a decade ago, there was no thought that you'd ever call home except for maybe twice a week. But now we've reached a point where the younger generations are so dependent on technology that you can increase their anxiety dramatically if they don't have a cell phone or access to all this other information in their social media. So as we move forward, for my generation, it's not a significant impact for someone to say, hey, turn in your phone, and once a week you have a chance to call home. It's not a big deal for me. But I went up to a brand new recruit and said, hey, you're not going to have access to the internet in the palm of your hand 24/7. That can create significant trauma psychologically. So that will be interesting to see how that plays out, and if there's special programs the military has to put in place just to deal with, the kind of the human addictions to technology that are developing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it does. It goes back to basic training. British recruits now, they don't have access to their mobile phones for the first 5 weeks of training. They have to go cold turkey. If they need to phone home, there are mechanisms in place that allow them to phone home. But for those first 5 weeks, hand in your phone. And then after that, you might get it in the evenings, you might get it at weekends, whatever it might be. But yeah, I think that's a significant area of concern.
So this is such a big kind of topic or area. What books or resources could you direct the audience to find out more about this?
So I went through my bookshelves, not just mine, but I went through my kids' bookshelves as well, to try and think of some of the more diverse things that I have read and do read regularly. And some of these books I've read more than once. So the one that inspired the original piece was this one, Churchill's Wizards. And it pretty much looks at camouflage from the point of view of deception. It's very, very well researched. It goes through a lot of different areas. It looks at mincemeat. It looks at fake trees in no man's land and all sorts of things. And it raises some very interesting questions. So that's the book that inspired this piece in the first place. And kind of linked to that one is this one. It's Churchill's Ministry of Ungentlemanly Warfare. Again, another very, very well researched book. Is a little bit more on the scallywag side. It looks at some of the techniques that we used during the Second World War to obtain that advantage, particularly with the Special Operations Executive, with the very clear order of set Europe ablaze. That was their mission statement, and it's a very good read. It's a very easy read, and both of those books helped inspire this concept of third generation camouflage. A couple of others. This is one that I've had for quite some time. It's the original 1961 version of Che Guevara's guerrilla warfare, introduced by a major from the United States Marine Corps. That very much helps with the kind of understanding of how your enemy thinks. It talks about mobilization of the masses. It talks about the use of propaganda. It talks about the different phases of a revolution. So actually, if you're going to start operating in this space, you need to start understanding some of those concepts. It goes back to what I said about learning from terrorists, how they do leadership and organizational structures. Bringing it a bang up to date with the kind of social media stuff. This was one of the first social media books. Social Media Rules of Engagement. A very, very good book. Looks primarily at things like crisis communications. How are you going to use your social media when things go wrong? How are you going to use your social media to recover after reputational damage? But it looks at social media as a channel and how you relate and link to your audiences through that. So that's definitely on there. My current read, I'm not a very fast reader, you may have gathered. I'm not a fast reader. My current read is this one, The Plot to Destroy Democracy. Very good explanation of active measures being used by the Russian state and how it has enormous strategic effect, particularly focused on the US election and the rise of Donald Trump. Everyone's talking about this one at the minute, so I might as well join in. Like War, pretty much everyone's got this. Everyone's read it. Everyone's got a view on it. I'll hold off on that one because I think I'm probably going to be writing about that one in the near future. Just a couple of others that I picked up. These are both off of my kids' shelves. For those that haven't found Horrible Histories yet, find Horrible Histories. Some of the really good little stories behind huge events, and Horrible Histories goes back. There's stuff on the Romans, there's stuff on the Greeks, there's stuff on the Saxons and the Vikings. The World War II ones are particularly good, and well worth a read, especially if you're a history buff, but also have a bit of a sense of humor about it as well. So I can recommend anything by Horrible Histories. And just going back to where we started with Churchill's Wizards, this is actually a kid's book, and it's called Weird World War II, and it's all about the strange inventions and the peculiar things that happened during the Second World War. And I think certainly for me, reading kids' books about certain topics help give you a real clarity of thought that it's not overcomplicated by some of the more adult literature around some of the topics of our time. And learning from history is never a bad thing, but particularly picking up books like that, which I bought on the same day as I bought Churchill's Wizards, because we were in London and we visited the Churchill War Rooms, and that's where we picked up those books. So yeah, that's kind of a whistle-stop tour of my book recommendations.
So I'm well plugged into you and on social media just because, well, you have great research coming out, and I look forward to seeing your future articles and stuff. For the audience out there, could you run down the list of your social media and information about the i3Gen?
Yeah, I'll lead with an apology. I'm not a fast reader, and I write very slowly as well, so I apologize in advance that there isn't this constant stream of stuff coming from me. So on Twitter, I'm Rick_Cole. My profile is the little Ewok. It's mostly centered around information operations, but also gives you some insight into some of the other stuff I'm interested in. Star Wars, sharks, conservation, shooting, and I'm also a dad of two boisterous boys, so they certainly get a mention. But as we discussed earlier, I'm quite cagey about my personal security for obvious reasons. So yeah, but that's me on Twitter. I have a Medium account. Likewise, search for Rick_Cole. That's where you'll find some of my original blog pieces, particularly around social media. I did one on social media as a weapon system for training. So teaching people that they have to have a safety, then a way to handle it, and then you can then build that and work out who your social media marksmen and your social media snipers are. And there's other stuff on there about looking after your accounts and things like that. And then the website for i3Gen is www.i3gen.co.uk. A lot of the blog pieces by myself and my business partner, Paul, are on there. He comes from the corporate communications side of the world. So a lot of stuff on there about better use of corporate communications. I then tend to do the more military stuff. And the third generation camouflage one is on there as well.
Now, I have seen courses offered on that website. Are those courses in person, or are they offered in an online formatted?
No, they're face to face. We run them primarily down in London. If there are organisations that have more than a small number of students, we are running a number of courses for military units and formations. But the ones we offer on the website, they're open to all. Have had lots of interest. We are possibly running a course somewhere overseas, somewhere in the future, but I can't say much more about it than that. But fingers crossed that will come off, because that will be a great opportunity. But they're open to all, and anyone can send us the request form that's on the website under the training tab. Look at some of the courses available and send us a message. If it's not quite right, if it doesn't quite meet your requirement, let us know. And we can tailor it to your individual needs or your unit or your organization's needs.
Before I thank you for taking the time with me, is there any last comment or topic that you'd like to throw out there?
There's a lot going on in the world at the minute, and I think every now and then we need to take a big step back, look at what defines us as democracies or whatever else, and without sounding too grand about it, I just think as a military community we represent probably the very best that society has to offer. We do have our critics, absolutely, and only rightly so, but particularly the relationship across the Atlantic with our American, Canadian partners, with our NATO partners, information operations, information warfare, very much flavor of the month at the minute. We are a very diverse community, and I mean diverse not in the military sense, but diverse as in we really are diverse, both regulars, reserve, active duty, from Canada all the way across to Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. We are cementing ourselves as a real community. We share a lot of information, we share a lot of knowledge through all sorts of means of blogs and posts and occasionally even getting together for a beer. But yeah, we need that community. We need that community support, because working in information operations, we are often misunderstood, often misunderrepresented, often completely left out on a limb. And there are increasingly some quite outrageous conspiracy theories about what we actually do. So we need to look after each other. We need to reach out and explain what it is we do, both internally to our own leadership most of the time, who are a target audience in themselves, and to wider society, and say that, just because something says information operations on it doesn't mean it's sinister, it's not psyops, it's not the dark arts, it's none of that. It is the military coordination of activities that operate in the information environment. It's nothing sinister. It's what we've always done. We're just trying to do it better with some very, very modern tools, which we're not quite familiar with yet.
Well, thank you. I deeply appreciate you taking your time, and I definitely look forward to seeing more of your products coming out and learning more from you in the future.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you very much.
For the audience out there, I want to tell you that I recently published an anthology of my articles. It's now available on Amazon. It's called The Evolving Warfighter, Building a Better Warfighter. It's a collection of 17 articles. From now until the morning of February 9th, the ebook edition of this book is available for only 99 cents. This would be a great book for anyone interested in self-development theory or practical approaches for self-development. For more information and the direct web link, you can look in the description bar below. Finally, I want to thank everyone for watching. We appreciate your time. We invite you to subscribe to the Evolving Warfighter for more videos on the topic of military self-development and military history. And until next time, focus on your self-development so we can ensure that we can dominate the modern battlefield.